very, very exciting to be able to talk to you today. And, for those who are not familiar, what you do and what eating disorder specialists do in general, can you just guide us quickly?
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, most people tend to introduce me as a nutritionist, which I'm actually not. So, I would start by
Okay.
saying that I do help people with their nutrition, but the approach that I take is more from the mindset point of view. So, my
Hmm.
background, I actually worked in the fitness industry for a long time. And then I went on and studied psychology and mental health, and I certified as a coach in different areas. So, what I'm doing is helping people who struggle with food and nutrition, but instead of telling them just what to put on their plate and changing exactly what they eat or giving a kind of cookie cutter diet plan, we're really looking at, what's going on in your mind when it comes to food. What's the emotional connection that you have with food and what are you using it for? And that just looks completely different to every single person. But whether that might be someone who emotionally eats, it might be someone who struggles with binge eating. So I specialize in binge eating disorder, which is a topic I think people don't talk about so much or maybe don't even know
Okay.
exists. And then it might also be something like people who are just done with diets. I think a lot of us, especially who grew up in kind of 90s culture, very diet orientated, very low fat, you know, everything skinny mentality. People who are just done trying to diet and lose weight, or who feel that they lose weight and they can't keep it off and start to realize maybe there's something else going on beyond just food. That's the people that I work with. So just everyone's relationship with food looks so different. And my job is really to help them kind of pick it apart and to rewire it and reframe it in a way that actually works for them now.
That sounds very interesting. That's true that not a lot of people talk about that. But can you share your personal journey with emotional eating and what
Mhm.
actually led you to work in this space?
Yeah. So I would say that I always had quite a complex relationship with food. So since I was really young, I grew up again kind of in a household of women who were on diets. And it was just something that I was exposed to from a young age. So I kind of knew what I shouldn't eat. I had a
Mhm.
lot of awareness around what was going to make me gain weight and that I shouldn't gain weight and that, diets meant being miserable and unhappy. And that was kind of what I saw around me. So from quite a young age, I was always trying to be healthy and trying to avoid certain foods. I have a major sweet tooth, but I knew that that was a bad thing growing up. So I had a kind of eating disorder from quite a young age and went through all aspects, I would say, of the journey. So under eating, severe restriction and weight loss. And then on the back of that, not getting any support with it, I had the kind of rebound of weight gain and the binge eating that normally comes after a kind of period of restriction and disordered eating. So I kind of experienced both ends of the spectrum of being really underweight and losing my social life because I didn't want to eat and I didn't want to be exposed to food. And then also the kind of other side of that spectrum where I had no control around food anymore and, then didn't like my body anymore and also didn't want to socialize because I didn't feel happy in my body. And it was just something I bounced between for many, many years. And I think our relationship with food and body image, as much as it might seem kind of shallow to some people who haven't experienced that, when you're in it, it can be really, really distressing. And for people who are struggling with this, I mean, I think it's really common to tell someone, look, there's more to life than what you weigh and you look
Yeah.
great. Don't worry about it. But really, this can hold people back from everything. It holds people back from meeting a partner and it holds them back from getting promotions and traveling and really, going for the things that they want to in life because they don't have the confidence or their brain is just so taken over by thoughts of food and body image and, all these issues that come with it. So it's a topic that can maybe seem a bit trivial, but I think because I've been in it and I've experienced the depths of it, I'm so passionate about helping other people get out of that.
So, do you remember what was the turning point that made you realize that emotional
Mm.
eating was an issue in your life? Because I know this is where a lot of people are actually, that they're just struggling. they
Mm.
don't really realize that there is an issue until it's probably too late.
Mm. Interesting. So for me, I think I can remember the turning point where I realized that I needed to do something about my relationship with food. Now, that was a specific day where I was actually watching a YouTube video. It was someone I used to follow years ago, and she had been an ex bodybuilding competitor. And basically, this woman was having a breakdown, and she was talking about how her metabolism was destroyed. She couldn't lose weight anymore. And she, was having a terrible relationship with her husband because of it. She was struggling to conceive, all this stuff that she was going through. And it was as a result of her constant, weight loss and weight gain and weight loss and weight gain. And I remember watching this and thinking, if I don't do something, that's going to be me. So that was a turning point where I decided, okay, I need to stop doing what I'm doing and start nourishing my body in a different way. So it was kind of the beginning of then like a 10-year journey to really change my relationship with food. But in terms of emotional eating, I think I always knew growing up that I was a comfort eater. I would have
Yeah.
said that growing up in Scotland, we have very dark nights, cold nights.
Yeah.
Comfort eating is a thing, right? You sit in front of the TV and you just want that something sweet. So I always knew it was a problem, but I always tried to counteract it with a diet.
Mhm.
And I mean, I think it just took a long time throughout that journey of healing my own relationship with food to realize that the food wasn't really the problem. Or, I think just to have a different approach and maybe a bit more compassion towards the fact that I was an emotional eater. Yeah. So I in terms of one turning point, I think that's a kind of long-winded answer, but emotional eating is something that I think I've learned a lot about over my own training and through the years. And then also working with clients who emotionally eat. It's just been a journey of finding more understanding for it and different ways to manage it rather than one specific turning point.
So, if I ask you, what is actually the difference between emotional eating and physical hunger? What?
It's a really good question. So I would break it down. I break hunger down into 3 different categories of hunger. So the first one is physical hunger. So this is where you've got the physical symptoms. You've got, the kind of grumbling in your stomach. Maybe your energy's starting to get a bit low. You know that you need that energy boost. That would be the physical hunger. And that shows up differently for different people. But I would say kind of typically, it's in the stomach and it's in low energy. We've then got physical cravings that come along with that. So sometimes we have specific cravings, but it's not necessarily emotional. So that might be like you've just done a workout and you're now really craving something like juicy or cold. Or maybe your period's coming and you're now craving like a steak, or you're craving something sweet, more chocolate. Or it could even be that you've driven past a sign for something on the highway and then suddenly you're thinking about like a chicken wrap, These are these
Yeah.
physical cravings. But again, they're not necessarily emotional. And the emotional hunger is really when you're looking to food to fill a need that is not hunger. So that's the simplest way to put it. Like, I do not have a physical need for hunger, but I'm looking to food to fill this need, which is most likely an emotional need. So a couple of little tests that people can maybe do if they're not sure would be to ask yourself, if someone gave me a really boring chicken salad right now, would I eat it? Right? So if I'm sitting on the sofa, I've already had dinner, it's 8 p.m. I think I maybe want something. If someone gave me a cucumber or a carrot or a really bland chicken salad, would it satisfy me? Would it do? Might not be as exciting, but would I take it? Or is it that I want something that's really salty, really sweet, has the kind of that fat sugar combination that really actually hits up the reward system in the brain? And if you're like, no, I want that, that's what I really want, then it's more likely an emotional need that you're trying to fill.
Oh, that's so interesting. That's true. I think that a lot of us, especially when we, in the evening on the sofa watching like different things, videos, podcasts,
Yeah.
Netflix, and this is where you start to realize that probably you don't mind ordering a pizza or a
Mm.
burger or something like that. That's very interesting.
So I was going to say, in terms of those late night cravings, I think there's a couple of reasons for that, right? Most of the time, it's the end of the day that we get to that point where we're exhausted, right? It's
Yeah.
the end of the day. You've ticked up all your work stuff. You've maybe been on the go since 7 a.m. in the morning. You've not really had time to stop. And then you sit on the sofa and you finally kind of like decompress. So often that's the time where actually there's a couple of things I think that happen. One is the tiredness hit, but also you're now faced with things that you've maybe been avoiding throughout the day as well. So the exhaustion that's come up throughout the day, the stress from the day, you're now sitting with the ability to feel it. Whereas when you're on the go, you're really in fight or flight, right? Throughout the day, you don't
Mhm.
have time to think about it. But in the evening, then you're kind of faced with it. And then that's when we start to look for something to fill those little voids. It's like, maybe I'll just go and get a pizza, or maybe I'll just order
Yeah.
something from Deliveroo. So I think that's a big thing that happens for people. It's kind of the wave that hits you in the evening. And then also sometimes it's just a habit. We get into a habit and we get stuck.
Have you noticed if there are any common triggers for emotional eating?
Yeah. So I guess you can say, stress, right, is one of the biggest ones. We're all stressed, burned out very often. There's there's also some personality traits that are
Mm.
really they influence emotional eating. People pleasing is a big one. So people who kind of people please throughout the day tend to emotionally eat. And again, I think that comes down to stress, because if you are a people pleaser, then you kind of say yes to everything throughout the day. You tend to neglect your own needs a bit more. And then it comes to the evening. And again, you've been kind of burned out throughout the day, right? And now you're faced with that. So stress, boredom is another one.
Yeah.
Boredom is huge. That's where there's just a habit, right? That can be really hard to break when we've practiced it for a very long time. Procrastination as well. When
Mhm.
I think either when there's those tasks that you just don't want to do, and you think, well, I'll just go and get a little snack, just
True. True.
suddenly I need something sweet.
Especially with home, I guess.
Yeah,
'Cause
yeah,
regularly you got all these little distractions and you literally try to
yeah,
entertain yourself.
yeah. But essentially, what's happening when we emotionally eat is, we're looking for dopamine. That's what we're getting from food. So, on a subconscious level, we know that when we eat, and especially when we eat something that's, again, high fat, high sugar, high salt, we're not emotionally eating super healthy foods, right? When
Mhm.
we do seek that comfort, what we're really looking for is that little dopamine hit. So, it's that little light in the brain that just gives you a few minutes of relief. And we get that. But then normally what happens after the relief is we're then faced with the fact that, it's 9 p.m. and I didn't really want to eat something very heavy, or I've just had a bunch of sugar and now I'm not going to sleep very well, or I've been healthy all day, but now I don't feel great and I've let myself down. But we do get that temporary reward. So it's a reward seeking behavior, and it's really deeply wired in the brain for most of us. So whatever the trigger is, normally the thing that you're looking for is that reward of dopamine, and it's a temporary relief.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And if you look into all these triggers, what advice would you give to people who want to overcome them? Are there any, step by step guide how to avoid being trapped?
Yeah. People are probably going to hate this because I think everyone wants the quick fix, right? People want
Yeah.
a very quick answer. Oftentimes, in the beginning, especially if you feel that you're an emotional eater, and if it's something that's happening quite regularly for you, a lot of the work in the beginning is going to be reflective. So, the thing that people tend to do is to say, I know that I emotionally eat in the evening, let's say, so I'm going to stop and I'm going to eat healthily, and they'll create a diet plan for themselves. But then it's not addressing the issue, so then they just continue with the same behaviors because it's
Mhm.
a really hard habit to break. And a lot of the time, if you want to find out what's triggering you, you do have to then work backwards. So when you have emotionally eating, or if you think you might have emotionally eating, start to ask those reflective questions. So maybe get a journal that you just write in, every time it happens, and you start to ask, okay, was I physically hungry? What kind of craving was that? What did I need that, or was it an emotional craving? And if it was, okay, how was I feeling? Did something happen? Was I stressed?
Mm.
Was I bored? Was I angry? Did I just have a fight with my partner? Am I lonely? So if you can start to pinpoint what was the feeling that I was trying to avoid or trying to get away from, and then you work backwards to what was the thing that triggered that feeling. And this is
Yeah.
just a way that we can then start to establish those patterns. And for example, a client the other day had told me that she realized that she emotionally eats on a Tuesday, and it's always a Tuesday. And then working back, she realized that she sees her in-laws on a Tuesday. And that meeting the in-laws really stresses her out. So
Okay.
that leads to stress, which then leads to stress eating. But again, that's kind of a reflection that she's had to come to now realize. And now she knows what that trigger is, which is meeting the in-laws. Now we can start to work on things to manage that trigger rather than managing the emotional eating. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I think that self-reflection is
Mhm.
definitely something that, it actually just touches upon so many other things in life, not necessarily with eating, but trying to
Mhm.
understand, to do this self-analysis and to make sure
Yeah.
you really understand what's going on in your
Mhm.
mind, your body, to take a few minutes just to, just to look through your day, what happened, what you were doing, and then
Mhm.
realized what been actually triggering you. I really liked what you mentioned about being a people pleaser. And I've never realized that there might be some connection between, um, between food or emotional eating and
Mhm.
fact that you literally saying yes to everybody during the day. And at the end of the day, you feel exhausted. And this is and this is what triggers you, right?
Yeah.
This is so, so interesting to do this self analysis. Do you
Yeah.
remember during your journey what were your triggers and how did you realize that?
Yeah. So what's interesting is when I started my journey, I didn't have support, right? When I started, I was a binge eater and I was so ashamed of it. I didn't even know that this was a thing. And actually at the time, it wasn't even a registered condition. So there definitely wasn't, nobody out there was supporting with it. Nobody was
I was
talking about
actually
it.
about to ask you what exactly is binge eating?
Yeah. So binge eating would be, you've got kind of, our eating is on a spectrum, right? And on one side,
Mm.
we've got emotional eating. And on the other side, we've got binge eating. And we're all somewhere on that spectrum. I think you would really struggle to find anybody that never emotionally eats because
Mhm.
we're conditioned to it. Again, it's a way of getting dopamine. So we all know that. We've all learned that from quite a young age. So most of us do tend to turn to food at times. Now, the difference is there's one person on one end of the spectrum who might feel a bit down and say, you know what, I want like a cheese toasty and tomato soup because that's what my mum used to make me as a kid. And, that's just bringing me a bit of comfort. And they might go and have that and then that's it. Or, they might order a Deliveroo or order a pizza or something. It makes them feel better and then they move on. But then as we go along the spectrum, we've got people who maybe do it more frequently and that have learned to lean into emotional eating more and maybe haven't been given the tools to actually deal with emotions and process emotions. So they've kind of developed that habit to turn to food much more fastly and much more commonly. And then on the other end, where it's binge eating, this is more, a lot of the time there's a bit more trauma involved or a lot of restriction. So if someone's been suffering with a lot of restrictive dieting, it can trigger binge eating or some kind of trauma where it's an out of control way of eating. So it's not just ordering a pizza. It's ordering a pizza, eating to the point that you're probably uncomfortably full, then maybe going into the cupboard and thinking, well, I've just had the pizza, so I'm going to have everything else and I'm going to start again tomorrow. And it might be then, a biscuit and then a piece of bread and then something else. But essentially, binge eating is eating to a point that you're not comfortable
Hmm.
And normally it's not done in front of people. So you're eating in a way that you wouldn't really eat in front of other people. So there's a kind of secretive nature about it. And for some people, there's a real lack of control. So it can really feel like being out of the body and completely not having any control over the way that you're eating.
Is it also connected with having triggers in your life, or it's something different?
Yeah, definitely, definitely. And, again, because of depending on childhood and depending what we've been through, each of us has this different relationship with food. And I
Mhm.
think our childhood relationship with food and our relationship with body image and diet culture and everything that we've learned there, these get so intertwined as well. So for a lot of us, we've maybe learned to lean to food, but then we've also learned that we should diet and restrict. So it's this
Yeah.
battle between the two, which just makes it even more complicated. But,
Yeah.
it can, for some people, for example, it might be that growing up, maybe if you think about it, when you were growing up, if I was to ask you if you felt sad or if you felt angry or something was going on, if you think back to how your parents were with you, did they tell you, it's okay to feel sad and it's okay to feel angry and, you can sit with it for a few minutes?
Yeah, yeah. Well, looking back at my childhood, I think I was rather happy to have parents supporting me and
Mm,
willing to have this open conversation on what's going in my life.
yeah.
Um, but I do realize that it's not the case for a lot of families.
I think just to come back to what you're saying actually about like you having quite a positive experience, and I think
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
amazing, right? And it's even for people who had really positive childhoods. For example, I was super lucky as well, and I grew up and I had great parents that really tried their best. But I think no matter how much parents try their best, they don't always get it right in that sense, right? And it's not through badness or whatever. Sometimes they're busy, they don't have time. They don't
true.
have that language themselves. So sometimes maybe when people are angry, they're told, go to your room. So it's like,
Mm,
it's not okay to be angry. Or it might be you're sad, like, don't be sad, don't cry. And these things are actually kind of teaching you that it's not okay to feel these feelings, that you shouldn't feel it. And the parents are normally not saying that from badness, right? They're saying that because they
yeah,
don't want it to be comfortable. Or, which is really common, oh, you fell over and you're crying? Here's an ice lolly. So you get
sure.
distracted with food as well. These kind of things are teaching us not necessarily to sit with emotion, but instead to kind of to turn to food and to escape the emotion. So my advice to people who are parents, I want to be careful here because I'm not a parent, so I definitely don't want to tell anyone how to raise their child. But there's a really good thing called a feelings wheel. So if you just Google feelings wheel, and basically that can be a good first step, even if it's for yourself, maybe not for a child, but just to help them identify what they're feeling and to just allow space for the feeling and just, yeah, ask questions about it, see what's going on, have that open conversation, and just maybe
Hmm.
look out where where you might be doing those kind of go to your room or don't be sad and where you might be distracting with food or toys or whatever it might be.
So that's very interesting how, emotional eating actually interacts with other mental health challenges like anxiety or depressions. We all live in this, era when people are encouraged to have a particular body image. And I know that body image is another topic that you are
Mm,
very passionate about.
yeah.
So what is the connection between eating disorder or, emotional eating and body image?
That's a good question. So eating disorders, and I don't personally work with people who have anorexia or bulimia because these are kind of higher risk things and they really need to be working with a multidisciplinary team. So if someone has one of these issues, they really need to be working with a doctor as well as a psychiatrist as well as a specialist. But a lot of eating disorders, it is coming from a trauma again. And a lot of the time there's a kind of fear of losing control. So that eating disorder is serving a purpose in some way. And a lot of the time it does come down to control. At the same time, it can be body image related because you will see someone who has an eating disorder and they also have a big fear of gaining weight.
Mhm.
But then if you think about it, the fear of gaining weight also stems from a lack of control around weight, or a lack of
Yeah.
control around weight gain, or even a kind of maybe self-acceptance issue, or, will I be accepted by others at a heavier weight? So I think it's tricky. It's tricky. And this is why it does sometimes require, not only the doctor and nutritionist, but it also does require a psychiatrist or a therapist and a specialist, because if there's a high risk, especially when it comes to health, then, you really need to be careful. It's a tricky question. I think, again, a lot of it's very reflective. And a lot of people who are really struggling with an eating disorder, most people who emotionally eat, they know, right? And
Okay.
people who emotionally eat are quite happy to say, I want to stop emotional eating. But if someone has an eating disorder, um, it's much less likely that they'll go for help, or it's much
Mhm.
less likely that they'll ask for help, because they're kind of getting a bit more from it and there's more fear involved there. People don't want to emotionally eat because normally they don't want to gain weight and they don't want to feel that they don't have control over food and the health aspects that come with it.
Yeah.
But if someone's deep in an eating disorder and they're already maybe at kind of a lower weight, then they might have a fear of actually getting help because they don't want to gain weight.
Oh,
So
that sounds like a very complex subject.
it is. And I think it's hard if someone, especially if you're around someone who has an eating disorder, this is where it can be really difficult, because you want to help that person so badly, but it's really hard to get through if they're not at a place that they want to help themselves. But again, I think these kind of open conversations and talking about, how are you feeling? This is the best thing that you can do for anyone if you want to support them, or even if you are someone that's maybe kind of struggling with your eating. I don't think we need to diagnose and label everything. At the end of the
Mhm.
day, it's food. And if the way that you eat, whether it's emotional eating, maybe an eating disorder or restriction, or whether it's a body image issue, and you're looking in the mirror and it's causing you pain or conflict, if any of this stuff is taking up more space in your brain than you would like it to, then you can
Mhm.
reach out and get support. I think that's the best thing. You don't need to diagnose it. You don't need to put yourself somewhere specific on a spectrum to get help. If this is hurting you more than it's helping you, and if it's taken away from your life, then there's conversations that can be had and there's work that you can do on that to improve it. I think that's the main thing, really.
That's very interesting what you say. Since I work a lot with women, providing styling services, and we also create custom-made clothing, of course, we receive a lot of messages like, I need to lose weight first before I order anything. Or we hear a lot from brides searching for their wedding dresses that they're not happy about their body, they're losing weight for the big day. We have all this pressure from the society telling us that somehow we need to lose weight. How would you address these particular thoughts? What advice would you give to people who are putting all this pressure on themselves, trying to get ready, to get prepared for a special event in their life? Or somebody who is really stuck into this cycle when they try to lose weight, trying to look better, but then they understand that it takes time, so they avoid wearing the clothes that they would like to wear. And like they don't feel well, they're going back to, and it's like it's a circle, really.
Mhm. Yeah. I find it so fascinating. I think the way that it shows up for your clients, I find really, really interesting. I'm sure there's a lot that you see with people's wardrobes and the way that they handle their clothes. And it's hard. I think that's, like you say, we are in a society where we're constantly told that we can be better, right? And that we should look better, or we're fed these images. And I think we need to be accepting of that this is the world that we live in. And
Mhm.
yeah, I definitely am not going to be a kind of, I think there's a lot of power in the body positivity message, but at the same time, I think we need to accept that it's okay to want to look your best. It's okay if you want to lose weight, if that's good for you and that's what you want. But there's a diet industry that makes a lot of money from
Mhm.
telling us that we should try the latest pill or the latest injection or whatever. a lot of power in the marketing that's being pushed on us all the time. So it's really hard to fight. And it would be really hard to sit here and say, like, just love yourself as you are. And I don't think it's realistic.
No.
But I think for people who are struggling with this kind of, when I lose the weight, I think this is a big message that people carry. When I lose weight, then I'll dress the way that you're telling me to dress, right? Or when I lose weight, I'll be able to wear that, or I'll be able to, fit into certain thing. And essentially it's like saying, when I lose weight, I'll be happy. When I lose weight, then I'll be able to do all these things. And most people who have lost weight will tell you that a lot of the time they just spent it worrying about regaining the weight, especially if you're losing it in these extreme measures and not in the healthiest ways with healthy life changes. So we have this idea that it's going to make us happy, and a lot of the time it's not, but that's really hard to let go of. So I would say trying to acknowledge, if you want to lose weight and if you want to change your body, try and do it in a healthy way that's actually making you feel healthy at the same time. But it's okay if that's what you want, but can you still be the best version of yourself in the meantime? And maybe that means, coming to someone like yourself and taking the styling advice and saying, even though I don't love my body right now, can you help me to dress in a way that it feels better? Because just because you don't love your body, if you then dress in a way that you feel garbage and your clothes are too tight, or, because you don't like your body, you're not wearing the things you want to wear, you feel frumpy, that just makes you feel worse, which just perpetuates the cycle. Whereas if you can say, you know what, I'm going to show up as the best version that I can today, come to someone like yourself, learn how to dress for the shape that you currently have, at least just make the most of it, do what you can for yourself. Yeah. And then the journey will be a bit more enjoyable. Not easy, but I think
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And, a funny thing, well, what I also see is that sometimes from our perspective, having worked with so many women, sometimes there is actually no issue with the body at all. But she had all this pressure coming from this external world. What advice would you give to those people? How to overcome these external voices and to reconnect with yourself?
I think that's really hard. I think I've noticed this culturally as well, that in certain cultures it's much more common for family to be a lot more opinionated and vocal about, telling people that they need to lose weight and so on. I think maybe it's a very British thing where we tend to be quite like, we don't want to offend anyone and we like to be polite. So in a way, I could probably gain 20 kilos and my family would be like, oh no, you look fine. Don't worry, you look fine. That's probably, I don't know. Okay. So I think in a sense, it shows up definitely. I've noticed for my clients from other cultures, it's definitely more present. And obviously some families in the UK are the same, but it's hard. I think that's really hard to manage. And then another side of that, I think also I've had clients who then really struggle because they go to family houses and gatherings and then they're also told they have to eat, because if they don't eat, then it's rude. They're kind of faced with both. You have to show up and eat, but then at the same time, you need to lose weight. What's wrong with you? This is where the people pleasing comes in. And when I'm working with clients, we do a lot of work, not just on what's happening in the moment with eating, but we really work on these aspects of ourselves and how to manage it, because you can't change other people and you can't change what they think or what they feel or what they're going to say. That's never going to be within your control, but you can set boundaries around it. Yeah. And you can work on your people pleaser. You can work on yourself, your ability to speak up, and then put things in place so that you don't put yourself maybe in vulnerable situations. But that takes, I have a lot of compassion for people who are in that situation because it's not easy. But I think you also mentioned the body image piece and that you work with a lot of people who look fine, but, see something different, right? When it comes to body image, if I was to say to you now, imagine a picture of an apple, right? You're going to come up with a picture, like, tell me, what does this apple look like in your mind? Is it a green apple or a red apple? What does your apple look like?
That's interesting. The first thing that came to my mind was big red apple. That's
Mhm.
probably because I have a similar one in my fridge right now.
The image that's in your mind of an apple is going to be very different from the image of the apple that I had, right? And I
Yeah.
think key thing here is that it is an image. The image in your mind is not an apple itself, it's an image. And this is the exact same when it comes to body image. The image that we have in our minds and the experience that we have in our minds is not our body. They're two separate things.
Interesting.
So you can have someone who is in a much larger body, but has great body image. And then
Mhm.
you can have someone who is up on stage in a bikini in a Miss World contest and has terrible body image. The body and what it looks like and how we perceive it can be two completely different things. And they're not often aligned with what society sees in any way.
I definitely like this comparison. I think it's demonstrates just how we perceive the world and the reality could be very, very different. I
Yeah.
definitely love it. Thank you for this. So, if someone is listening right now and struggling with emotional eating, what would be the first step you would recommend they take?
As a first step, I think using the tool that I kind of described earlier. So I have a lot of worksheets that I give clients, and a lot of what we do, we actually go through a structured program, and I work with people for 3 months minimum. And the reason we do this is we spend time identifying what the patterns are, identifying the triggers, and working on the nutrition itself, which takes time. So I would give 2 points of advice first. The kind of journaling that I mentioned earlier. So when you emotionally eat, or if you think about when you emotionally eat, reflect on that. When is it? When does it most commonly happen? And how are you feeling at that time? And then can you work back to what's maybe triggered that feeling?
Mhm.
So that would be the first thing to put the setting, because the more you can educate yourself and get to understand what's happening in your body, the more you can then learn to manage it and learn to navigate it. And the other thing I would say is to make sure that you are actually eating enough, because there is
Mhm.
again a difference between emotional eating and just eating because you're not fueling yourself the right way and you're not fueling yourself throughout the day. So if you're someone that's maybe skipping meals throughout the day, or if you're trying to diet but you're not eating enough and you're feeling a bit deprived, then you are going to eat more than you want to when it comes to certain times in the day, because your body's screaming out for food. So the first thing you really need to do is make sure that you are getting good nutrition. If your nutritional needs are met, then we can start to look at how we can work on the emotional eating. But you can't really address emotional eating if your nutritional needs aren't met, because that's a human need. And that desire to eat and that primal need is always going to take over. And it might not be emotional eating. It might just be that you're genuinely hungry. So we need to be able to separate the two. So that's why sometimes I do some work with clients around nutrition as well. Or if it's an
Yeah.
extreme case, maybe work with a nutritionist. But it's useful to try and separate them.
It's a really complex topic, right? So we need to approach and to see exactly what's happening before giving any particular advice. What for you is the most rewarding part of helping others overcome emotional eating?
Yeah, I think sometimes I'm too passionate about it. I think for me, it's never about weight loss, or it's never about body changes. It's seeing people do things that they wouldn't have done otherwise. So if a client comes to me and says, I can go out for dinner now and it doesn't scare me, or someone's gone for a promotion at work that they would never have done before. Someone actually said to me the other day, I kind of went to emotionally eat yesterday and I realized what I was doing. But then I decided just to eat a slice of the cake anyway because it felt good. But then after I ate the cake, I just moved on and I didn't beat myself up on it. And today I just got up and continued my day as normal. And this is such a small thing, but it's like, so basically food's not dominating your life anymore and it's not getting you down. And that, like these small, simple things are the things that I want to see and the things that make me happy when I'm working with people, because I think that's the most impactful.